The management of forests follows the natural biological cycle from the establishment of a forest to its breakdown. Sustainable forest management helps to steer the natural processes into the desired direction. Forest management essentially means that we implement goal-oriented silvicultural activities, even if we actively decide to do nothing. A forest management measure always has a purpose to fulfill. It's not an end in itself. In forestry, we always talk about the definition of management goals. What is the goal I want to reach, and how does this fit together with the natural development? A gap emerges from the difference between natural development and the intended management goal. This gap has to be bridged by silvicultural measures, and that is what we understand as forest management or silviculture. Regardless which management goal is being defined, whether it's a coniferous or deciduous forest, and whether we aim at mass products or quality timber, trees require appropriate climate and site conditions to develop into productive and vital individuals, and subsequent stable forest stands. Because under natural conditions, trees with desired traits, such as adequate stem form or crown shape, are not always prevailing. Human intervention is needed. The most important management tool is early density reduction and thinning, where trees are strategically removed for the benefit of others. This combats the disadvantages of a completely natural and random stand development by targeted and recurring interventions that support the intended management goal. Moreover, thinning not only increases the light availability for the remaining trees, but also for the forest floor. This supports natural regeneration and multi-layer structures, but also the biological activity of soil organisms through higher soil temperatures. And higher soil activity results in a better availability of nutrients for the trees. In addition, root competition of individual trees is reduced. Thus, roots can spread wider, enabling a better access to soil moisture and make the tree more stable. Depending on the age and structure of the forest at the time of thinning, suitable measures for sustainable forest management have to be taken.
Yes,
it is important to provide the trees with enough space in due time. That is why we start early with the maintenance of the young afforestation site, with density reduction, and then with the first thinning, during which marketable timber is already harvested. And then there is a second thinning. With all these measures, the expected climatic changes should be considered. Since the storms will likely become more severe, the stability, especially of spruce stands, becomes more important. Furthermore, thinning deciduous forests is important to produce a higher share of valuable quality timber. For both cases, coniferous and deciduous forests, a future tree-oriented management has advantages. Here, healthy, vital trees with good productivity and desired phenotypic traits are identified, marked, and fostered. The best time to select future trees depends on the management goal, the tree species, the tree height, and the general site conditions. As a rule of thumb, around 1/3 of the rotation period, or a height of 10 to 15 meters, is fine. For the selection of future trees, there are no absolute quality criteria. They just need to be the best in relation to the other trees. A fostering of these most suited trees of the given stand supports their crown and root development, and finally the diameter and volume growth. And this gives a surplus of more valuable timber, especially for deciduous trees. During a future tree-oriented thinning, two decisions need to be made. Firstly, the future trees which should be fostered need to be identified and marked. And secondly, the trees which need to be removed. The latter ones are competing for crown space with the future trees. So, like I said, two decisions. First, the tree which I will promote. Second, the trees which impede the future trees. That's the ones I want to remove. One selection criterion is the social status of a tree within the stand structure. A future tree needs to be vital, should have a dominant or predominant social status, should lack any damages and be of good quality. It is important to mark the future tree so it isn't damaged during the thinning activities. Trees competing with the future trees typically have a dominant or subdominant social status, and their crown is expected to grow into the crown of the future tree within the next 3 to 5 years. Usually, there are 2 to 3 of such competitors. Smaller, dominated or overshadowed trees which do not impede the growth of the future tree can remain. The remaining trees get more space to grow and to develop into vital individuals. This also increases the tree's resistance to pests and pathogens. With the development of better crowns and stronger root growth, more water and nutrients can be taken up, and the tree is better anchored to the ground. As long as no more than 20 to 30% of the trees is removed, the remaining trees are able to compensate for the removed timber volume through increased growth. The total growth of the forest stand is approximately at the level of a fully planted area. It should be taken into consideration that management activities vary between coniferous and deciduous trees, since for coniferous forests the focus is on the stability of the stand, while for deciduous forests, the production of valuable hardwood is most important. In coniferous forests, natural regeneration and dense afforestation sites require a first density reduction after the trees are well established. Strong density reductions with regard to species mixtures, quality and stability not only improve the vitality and therefore the resistance towards hazards, but also shorten the production time. This is followed by a period without interventions. 10 to 15 years after the first reduction, and depending on the local site conditions, a first thinning should be carried out. This activity can already be economically significant, since the resulting timber is suited for sale. After another approximately 20 years, the next thinning is required. On sites with less abundant water availability, this measure helps to balance the water regime for the remaining trees. All these activities are important to ensure the vitality, diameter growth, and quality of the trees. The Austrian Research Center for Forests, BFW, investigated these relationships at the trial site Ottenstein, where different management intensities were studied for more than 60 years within a Norway spruce stand. In all of our long-term thinning experiments, we have different thinning intensities and a control plot with zero management. Thus, we can compare what has happened. The question is whether a thinning regime is able to utilize the full growth potential of the given site, or whether an untreated area has higher total site productivity. We can see that this is not the case here. There are gaps, several snow breaks, and then we have no chance. In fact, the untreated plot is below the total growth of treated areas already. The stability of a forest stand is defined by its height-diameter ratio. Values below 80 are considered as stable, and the higher the height-diameter ratio, the more unstable the stand. In the untreated plot, trees have a relatively small dBH. Thus, the stand is very unstable and has an undesirably high height-diameter ratio. The height is determined by the site conditions and the diameter by the spacing. And when there are many trees, the crowns are very small because the trees have very little space. The crown is the engine of a tree. When a tree doesn't have a suitable crown, it of course can't grow and can't get thicker. That is the problem here. The trees are unstable, some very thin, and with the next heavy snowfall, some will break again. After some time, the stand might disappear. In contrast to the untreated control plot, this area was strategically thinned. First, every fourth row was removed, and during the next thinning, the middle row of the 3 remaining rows. After the first thinning, the tree count was still very high. But at the time when the experiment began, that was 1960, 600 trees were defined as management goal. Nowadays, that is too much, since the trees are too densely packed and the crowns touch each other. Today, we would define 250 to 300 spruces as a management goal at most. One can recognize the larger crowns in comparison to the untreated stand, and that the diameter is much larger. The plot therefore has a much better height-diameter ratio. Now we are in a plot where we reduced the tree density relatively early, so with a tree height of 10 meters, it was reduced to 1,200 trees per hectare. We can clearly see the effects of the larger tree space, the dimensions of the trees behind me or in this general area. These are remarkable dimensions for 60-year-old trees. A stable tree should have at least 50% crown length, calculated to the tree length, and we do have that on average. And with this crown length we have the advantage that even if heavy snow is going to break the tree top, the remaining crown is still long enough for the tree to survive. In such a case, it might extend a side branch and forms a new crown. The objective for deciduous forests is to increase the share of valuable hardwood timber. With the correct silvicultural measures taken at the right time, the share of valuable high-quality wood can be raised and the share of fire and pulpwood reduced. The most valuable trees are the ones which have a long trunk free of branches and a high diameter. The selection of future trees is one of the most challenging silvicultural activities during the management of deciduous tree stands. Shortcomings during the selection of future trees regarding the quality of the trees or the best date for the thinning have a negative effect on future revenues. An expert may be needed for the tree selection and marking. The thicker the trunk, the larger the amount of branch-free wood. In order to keep the stem core around the central pith with its many branches as small as possible, the silvicultural treatment is separated into 2 phases. In the first phase, a high tree density is required, as this supports natural pruning. Within this phase, the crown development is reduced and the diameter growth is relatively slow. Due to the high tree density, branches in the lower crown are suppressed and die off. The length of the green crown should not be less than 50 to 35% of the tree height. This phase helps to keep the percentage of the inner stem core small. The second phase starts when the lower branches of the trunk have died and partly dropped off until stem height to a quarter or a third of the total tree height. With the intensity of thinning activities and the course of thinning intervals, the forest manager is able to control the crown size and indirectly the trunk growth. The functional relationship between crown size and diameter growth helps to create a stand structure with a branch-free layer. The optimal distance between future trees should match the size of the intended tree crown at the end of the rotation period. Such a future tree distribution occurs only within ideal stands and under consistent management. Practically, compromises might be needed for an optimal distribution of the future trunks. How many future trees per hectare are needed depends on the management goal, which is the intended diameter of the final trees. For example, to reach a trunk diameter of 80 centimeters for oak requires a crown diameter of approximately 15 meters. All available field experiments with thinning interventions show that the right silvicultural activities, taken at the right time, increase the stability of coniferous forests and raise the value of valuable timber of deciduous tree species.